Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons where we try and take a darker turn with all the concepts we like. We like edgy content. If you like that kind of thing, please like, share, and subscribe. Please keep commenting. The best thing about this channel is being able to talk to all you guys about ideas, concepts, and the characters and the things that you guys have all been able to do. So without further ado, we're going to jump into this week's video, a continuation on the expert classes in 1D&D. We're talking about the Ranger. The Ranger has had a very interesting history in 5e. It has came out the gate with a really lackluster response. People really thought it was very weak and really did not think it was up to par with some of the other classes. I understand that completely. It has gone through a lot of changes. It wasn't until Xanathar's Guide to Everything where the class started to pick up pace, and it wasn't until Tasha's happened that everyone really finally said the Ranger is fixed, or at least had an idea that that's where they were going to be, and they were more content with it. I've always loved the Ranger. I get it. It's not a class everyone enjoyed, especially before those books came out. I didn't know I was going to love it until I started playing it, and it just felt really great to me. I'm hoping that 1D&D learned from what the response was with the original Ranger and really gave it something special, considering what the general conception is at this point, that the Rangers have gotten something great, and we're going to check that out as we get through everything. So I'm pretty excited to see what changes actually happen. At first level, you gain 3 abilities. The first one we're going to look at is Expertise. It reads as follows. You gain Expertise in 2 of your skill proficiencies of your choice. Stealth and Survival are arcanic choices for a Ranger if you have proficiency in them. Now, Expertise doubles your proficiency bonus. It's a really great thing for adventuring, for sneaking around, for scrounging for food, for things like that, conversation, persuasion, anything like that. Expertise was previously just a bard and rogue thing, and it is a very powerful thing in that aspect of adventuring. When you think of a Ranger, and I say this all the time, the best example of what a Ranger is Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings saga. He was great at basically everything. So I can understand where Expertise kind of falls into the mix here. I do think it's great as someone who basically survives in the wilderness and doesn't really go into towns usually, basically hangs around outside and survives basically on their wits and what they can scrounge about and is very resourceful. I think Expertise really falls into that category. I get a lot of the people are outraged that it now takes away flavor from the rogue and the bard, because those characters are really supposed to be those kinds of skill monkeys. It's a term that everybody uses for them. I don't think the Ranger is overstepping in those regards, because the Ranger has its own things to deal with. It's really designed to not have anything to do with persuasion and charisma really at all, so it really takes away from a lot of the face skills and the abilities to communicate with NPCs and things like that. And it requires you to be a great substitute for circumstances where you have to have people who are good at skills. A Ranger and a Rogue should work really well together, because both of their characters, based on the lore behind them, is that they're resourceful. They can do things that nobody else can. They're good, they're talented, they're capable. And I think the Ranger really embodies that really well. And that's something that the Bard, the Ranger, and the Rogue all share. They are capable. They're greater at doing things that you wouldn't expect them to do besides their own job. You often don't see Rangers a lot. So the chances of you having a Bard, a Ranger, and a Rogue in the same time, depending on your group, might be greater or might be less. But my experience, they're usually not all in the same group. So not having Expertise and having only 1 or 2 characters do it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Though I will reiterate, I understand that it makes you feel like you're stepping on the toes of another character class. But if you're playing with other characters ahead of time, you can really try and build your character on the skills that you want. And as a Ranger, you don't always need the same skills as everyone else. Your perception is going to be significantly better because wisdom is an integral part of the Ranger. So you might be able to deviate away that and kind of make yourself a little bit different and pick up things that other people won't. And that Expertise doesn't seem as daunting at that point, especially if you spread it out and let everyone use their role correctly. With rangers, with rogues, with bards, since they all have expertise now, the real issue is the concept of letting your player shine. If you happen to be good at one skill and so does everybody else, it doesn't mean you always have to do that skill. You can divvy it out and let other players and get their moment and try and succeed. You don't always have to be the person that does everything. Letting other people take their turn is just good policy. It's good player behavior. So a lot of the times these skills will overlap. And alright, it works out that way. Multiple people can be good at the same thing. It's okay. I don't see this as a bad thing. I see it as a great thing. Expertise doesn't get used a lot, so the more character classes that have it, the better off it is. And it's really only 3 who kind of have a very interesting sect in regards to the way you see the other character classes. The next ability you get also at first level is Favored Enemy. You are adept at focusing your ire on a single foe. You always have the Hunter's Mark spell prepared, and it doesn't count against the number of spells you can prepare. Moreover, you don't have to concentrate on the spell once you cast it. It lasts for its full duration until you end it as a bonus action or until you are incapacitated. This is a massive buff. This is incredible because A, you get spellcasting at level 1, which we're going to get into next, but you get Hunter's Mark, which is the equivalent of Hex. So whenever you make an attack, you do additional damage as long as that attack hits, and it's easier for you to track the actual enemy if they ever try to escape or things of that nature. And when an enemy falls, you can switch it to another enemy as a bonus action. It lasts a pretty good duration, and when you upcast it, that duration lasts even longer. Not having to concentrate on it gives you this incredible ability to use other ranger spells. Yes, it costs a spell slot, but it frees up your availability to do a lot of cool other things. And ranger spells, I hope they incorporate a lot of them and bring them all over because they're very interesting as they're very unique to the ranger class. This is a buff. This is a very big buff. I believe a lot of rangers are going to get multi-classed into simply because of this. And it's just strong. It ups your damage very quickly. And we'll get into some of the abilities and how that scales further on. But no concentration, always prepared, doesn't count against your spells that you can actually prepare, is a wild buff. And it gives you a lot of variety in the spells that you can choose from, rounding out your ranger to be more versatile, being able to overcome anything, which I think is a very integral part of what the ranger is. You're supposed to be able to overcome. You're supposed to see challenging scenarios, and you're supposed to attack them. You're supposed to have that confidence, and the skills and the tools behind you should reflect that. And this frees you up to pick the spells that actually do. Finally, at first level, you also gain access to spells. The magic system seems a little bit confusing to me. I really don't want to go into too much depth as I fully don't understand it, but it seems as if the tables all have spells that you can prepare per level as opposed to spell slots. I don't know if that's intended or if you're just supposed to know that many spells. It is very bizarre, but it seems like everyone also has prepared spells. For the ranger, it states that you have the following spells prepared: Cure Wounds, Guidance, Hunter's Mark, and Thorn Whip. And you can also pick 2 cantrips and 2 first level spells when you get to this class. So that's a lot of spells to have known right off the get-go. I don't know if they're going to change the spell slot system they have currently, or if they're really just going to keep things the way they are, or maybe use a different format for that. But at the time, I really can't say too much as I don't know, and I don't want to say something and be completely wrong. It is important to note that as a ranger, you can change your spells like a druid would, and that's really cool. That's something that's going to give you the availability to try a lot and really experiment and really build your ranger a couple of different ways depending on what you have. I have always thought of ranger spells as more of a technique or a skill. I forget what video I saw that. It might have been like WebDM or something like that, where it wasn't so much using actual magic to make things. It was more so using this energy to kind of create like a salve or something, or a bandage or something, and using that as cure wounds or something like that you can do really quickly, and you can bandage someone up, but it expends a resource. And I like the themology behind that. But it's weird that now you can have what seems to be a lot of spells known. So really take advantage of that and really get versatile with your character. Pick up things that might be only used sometimes, because maybe that time would come up and it'd be more beneficial. And because you can change them, it's like having a great safety net in picking spells you don't need and don't want to wait for another level up in order to switch out for something better. At 7th level, you gain access to roving. Your speed increases by 10 feet while you aren't wearing heavy armor. You also have a climb speed and a swim speed equal to your speed. This is an offshoot of one of the optional subclass abilities or ranger abilities that came out in Tasha's, and it is just kind of a buff. Yeah, your speed gets faster, but being able to climb and swim equal to your speed is pretty impressive. If you're in a scenario where you are climbing, as opposed to moving something like 15 feet, you can now move 40, which is a big difference. So if you happen to be adept at climbing, or that's one of the things you really want to be into, then take your expertise in athletics, because that's still going to be a check you're going to have to make. But being able to climb up and move fast is a great idea that you can really use, especially in caves and caverns. If you're going to be playing ranged, it's very important to pick that up, because now you can scale walls, and now you can move pretty quickly, and now you have to have enemies climb up to get you or fly up to get you. And it changes the dynamic of battle. It's a very tactical thing, and when you start getting off the ground and changing your perception of the world around you, you can come up with a lot of great things. It's a fun thing to do. And also, you never know when you're in a situation where you do have to climb out of something. And it's beneficial to have it. Although it isn't something huge and something wildly exciting, it is a nice thing to get. It does help you out with your adventuring. And you never know when you have to be underwater or anything like that, where swimming is going to really be a detriment. Especially if you have to beat a fish or a shark or something, or you're on a boat and you need to get somewhere. These kinds of things will make a very big difference in those scenarios. And they're passive. They're always on. So it's not the worst thing in the world. It's a good buff for mobility, and it helps you out in those very rare scenarios. They are rare scenarios, and they will often still require checks. Also, you can't do it wearing heavy armor. And if you're ranger and you're wearing heavy armor, you've done something wrong. Please talk to your DM, see what you've done, try and come up with a better way. Heavy armor isn't always the best scenario. I get it. High AC is great. It makes a huge difference. You can avoid a lot of damage that way. But there's a lot of things integral to the ranger that you really don't want to be hiding behind a plate armor and a shield in order to be able to do. At 9th level, you gain access to expertise for the second time, allowing you to pick 2 more skills that you are proficient with and double that proficiency bonus. I know I said expertise really works with the ranger. I think it's great at level 1 to have that. But additional expertise, I'll be honest with you, I think it does it a little too much. I think if they just had the 2 and left it at that, it would be better suited for the ranger. And I think it would set a nice distance between the rogue and the bard. And that way they can still feel more special. And the ranger can still be that very, very resourceful character. I know I said early on that it's a good thing for a ranger to be resourceful and be capable. And I think they really get that with expertise. And they get a lot of skill proficiencies anyway. That being said, I really think this kind of goes a little too far. I like it just the 2. I think that's great. It's just enough to feel better than your average person, but not too much that you're really going too far. And I think that rogues and bards would feel better knowing that you got it only once and they got it twice, and it still keeps that like nice distance between them. So you're a little bit better than everyone else, you're kind of middle of the road, and they're like excelling. And I think that works really well. And I think that kind of makes everyone a little bit happier. And it still gives the ranger that nice little buff that they need early on. At 11th level, you gain access to Tireless. Primal forces now help fuel you on your journeys, granting you the following benefits. Temporary hit points. Whenever you finish a short or a long rest, you can give yourself a number of temporary hit points equal to 1d8 plus your proficiency bonus. And decreased exhaustion. If you are exhausted when you finish a short rest, your level of exhaustion decreases by 1. First and foremost, at 11th level, 1d8 plus 3 or 4 is not that huge, but it will save you from one hit at least. And a buffer to your HP will make your current HP feel greater, and it's a nice thing to have. It's free, there's nothing stopping you or going to resist you from being able to use this as long as you take your short or long rests. So your HP will just go a little further. It's a little buff, it's not overwhelming, but it is noticeable to give yourself just a little bit more confidence when you're running out there, especially if your healing is low. Maybe it might bring you to a little bit closer to where you want to be. Maybe you spent most of your hit die so you can't jump back up to full, and this will help cushion that a little. And decreased exhaustion. This is important in harder campaigns. If you're playing with a really high difficulty setting, or if you're playing with the really, really hardcore rules, exhaustion is a real thing that you have to manage. If you're in scenarios where you're in very dangerous campaigns, being out in the wilderness and not having food, being in situations where you cannot rest because you're being hunted down and you have to run, exhaustion makes a big difference. Most campaigns you can avoid exhaustion 100% of the time. But if you're playing serious survival mode D&D, exhaustion is something you are constantly facing and is constantly giving you trouble because it is too hard to get those short and long rests, and this sets you above. This gives you that real feel of, I live in the wilderness. I live out in my favorite world. I live in the deserts and on the seas and in swamps, and that's where I live, and I know how to survive out there, so I know how to recuperate my energy. And it feels part of the ranger. It's one of those skills that really reflects who the lore behind the ranger is, and it really gives you that availability to feel more comfortable in these incredibly dangerous scenarios. Because you can always just get a little bit better than everyone else. Your rest makes you a little bit stronger, makes you a little bit more conscious. In deadly scenarios, it's going to give you the things you need in order to guarantee you're going to pull through these scenarios. I think it's cool. At 11th level, the game is changing. You're kind of towards the end, and you are seeing the full limits of what you can do as a ranger. Your subclasses are getting buffed, and it's a very important part for you to understand that it's not always gaining more damage that's important. Sometimes you need to gain adventuring and utility also. At 13th level, you gain access to Nature's Veil. You invoke spirits of nature to magically hide yourself from view. As a bonus action, you can expand a spell slot and become invisible until the end of your next turn. I don't like this. I think burning a spell slot is really not that beneficial to be invisible for 6 seconds. In an emergency where you need to escape, maybe. A lot of the times I feel like this will be more used just to be slippery in combat. Just to vanish real quick and appear, maybe not get opportunity struck, get yourself to safety, or help out a teammate or something. But it seems like a lot. To really getting just invisibility for 6 seconds. I don't like it. It seems like a big resource to burn a spell slot for a ranger because you don't have that many. I get at this level you're probably not using your first level spell slots for much, especially for damage and things like that, so you got to really consider what you're going for, but I'm just not impressed. At 14th level, you gain your final subclass feature. This is awesome. I really love that they push this up really high so you can really get that final ability. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. It's so cool to finally get these final level abilities and be actually able to use them in game, because most games end at about 12 to 14. Very rarely do they go past that. So it's incredible encourageable and so great that these abilities are now tangible and you have access to them at this early of the game, in consideration to waiting till you're 18, 19, or 20 to be able to use them. I really hope they incorporate this and they keep this, because you miss out on so much of game content when you're not playing games that go to the final level 20. And I get it, it's hard to balance. Level 20 combat is a lot like level 1 combat, because anything can kill you. It just takes 3 attacks to do so, and a lot of the times it's all coming from the same monster. It's very hard to balance. Spells are wildly powerful, and if the enemy has them at the same level as you, it is drastically changing. So I get that it's very difficult. I get a lot of DMs don't really want to go up to that level because it's very hard to dictate that and to figure it out and to plan out and balance it. It is a tremendous undertaking. But we're getting these abilities that we just desperately want to use. The abilities that we really want to hit level 20 to be able to do, and we get them at level 14, which is pretty reasonable. At 18th level, you gain access to Foe Slayer. Your Hunter's Mark now deals an extra 1d10 damage to its target, rather than an extra 1d6. So, now your Hunter's Mark got buffed, so you're doing 1d10 every time you hit with an attack, which is really, really great. That is a big buff. You are jumping up 2 dice sizes, which is pretty cool. And it adds to your damage, and because you don't have to concentrate it, and it's a bonus action, and you can always have it prepared, it's such a great thing that it's a core feature, that it's part of the Ranger. And that alleviates this dependency on it and this ability to say, now you can't concentrate on anything else because you need to be concentrating on Hunter's Mark. And it really benefits the keeping of casting it. And at 18th level, a lot of times, to be completely honest, you won't get here. A lot of campaigns probably still won't go to 18th level unless they change some things and start coming out with content books and things like that to help really teach everyone to balance encounters up to that high. But it is a good damage buff. You're attacking a lot anyway, and this really ups your damage as an average. It's great. It's an additional damage buff where you're starting to worry about, are you strong enough because you're at 18th level and you kind of want to be hitting wild things like paladins are usually with smites and things like that. It's a good way to keep pace. It's a good way to keep your damage up. And it's free. You're going to be casting Hunter's Mark anyway, all the time. This is wonderful for you. Our final thoughts. The new 1D&D Expert Class Ranger is a lot of what the Ranger should have been on release, in our opinion here. I do think the expertise goes a little too far, and just getting it at first level I think is more than enough. I do like that it scales really well. I like that your Hunter's Mark is awesome now. And you don't have to worry about concentrating on it. You don't have to worry about losing it. You don't have to worry about having other spells prepared. And you get to use other Ranger spells, because you're not focused on just doing this one thing every single combat. I think it's great. I think it works really well. I do hate Nature's Veil. I just don't like it. I love that the classes are all getting their final subclass ability at 14th level. This is definitely one of the better classes to come out from the 1D&D playtest. I think they get the damage boost they need. They get the adventuring utility that they need. And based on the fact that they can change their spells around, that gives them so much versatility. And it's not something that half-casters ever get, because you have to be very precise on what spells you pick, and you have to wait for a level up to switch one out. So if you made a whole bunch of mistakes, it's going to take a lot of time to correct it, and it's not going to feel great. But you can now change that. I think there's a lot of great things. I think this makes the Ranger a multi-class hotspot. I think a lot of people are really going to want to get that first level Ranger dip to pick up Hunter's Mark and just rock with it the whole time, because it's free and no concentration. All you need is a spell slot, and you get that from the Ranger anyway. So if you're a fighter, that's a pretty good deal. Also, I really do think that their direction with these classes is really focusing more on the lore and the story of the classes, and I think a lot of these changes are meant to reflect that. And I think they're trying to give the Ranger back all the things that they wanted the Ranger to be, which I'm excited about because I love the Ranger. But we have to be very careful to make sure that we're not just taking the survey and screaming for buffs and yelling at Nurse, because it kind of switches everything into a damage race. And that's not what this game is. It's really not supposed to be that way. Yeah, you want to be able to hit things. Yeah, killing things faster means you survive longer and you use less resources. I get it. And some people love to play just combat. But there is a whole concept of the game that we miss when we don't incorporate things that tell the stories of the characters. Because that's why we're playing. We're playing to tell the story. It's a role-playing game. And we want our character to be meaningful, and you want our subclasses to feel different. These kind of subtle little changes, these little adventuring buffs, these things that deviate away from combat, those are to help build that class to feel like the story of that class, to feel like what that class archetype should be. You feel more like Aragorn when you're running through the forest and everyone else is about to drop because they're suffering from exhaustion and you're ready to keep going. That is a Ranger. Those kinds of things are concepts that don't really get played out a lot because of the way the mechanics work, but to get close to those things is a real big part of getting these abilities in line and telling that story. And having those stories mixed with other character classes really brings that to the forefront. And you really feel the differences between them. And when there's not a lot of difference because everyone's doing high damage or having the same skills, I get it, there's a problem. There's a reason why people are outraged about the expertise and feeling that it's taken away from the other classes. I get it. In a way, yeah, it absolutely is. I think breaking it down a little bit works out better, but you want these classes to feel individual and feel special. The only way we're going to do that is if we keep taking the surveys and make sure we get our information out there and people know and understand and read. Because if you're waiting for someone else, or you believe, oh, everyone is saying the same thing, so they're going to take the survey, then you're not going to get the game you want. You need to vote. You need to take the survey. You need to submit it. And you really need to put conscious thought into it. It's not going to happen, and you're going to end up with a game that's going to be probably not what you want, and more so what somebody else want, or somebody else didn't care too much about, or it didn't bother them as much that they changed things. So take the survey. Take the survey, take the survey. And also, thank you so much for giving a Spooky Kid a chance.